It's time to talk about the Mograph module because it makes modeling so much easier. It allows you to do really complex things that would just take too long to do by hand. Let's dig into it. So let's get started. We'll get a sphere. So what if the idea is to have a ring of these spheres? These could be like, say, bolts for a panel. It could be like, I don't know, a arrangement of seats or something for like a throne. Either way, we would want to then copy. So I'm holding control and drag. And this is kind of what we're aiming for, right? So we want to have these objects all in a nice ring. But obviously you can see that this just isn't viable and it's not precise in the slightest. So that's not going to work. What we're going to do instead is drop down a cloner. So this is part of the Mograph module in Cinema 4D. You'll also find it here. It's a generator. But it's essentially Cinema 4D's tools for motion graphics. So we'll grab in a sphere and make it a child of the cloner. You can see there's different types. So you've got grid, object. So if you want to say, we'll get a cube. If you wanted to clone the spheres onto this plane, you could do that as well. Change the count. Okay. So that's object mode. There's linear, which will just do a line. So you can change by how much you want the clones to go up by. You can change the count as well. So instead of 3, we can do something like 30. We can do it per step or by endpoint, which means this will be the total length, and then how many clones we want within that is up to our picking. So that's endpoint versus per step. It's a set distance, and then it will just add on top of that. Cool. So that's linear, and then radial is the one that we're after. So if we adjust the radius, you can see we can add in how many we want, and it's precise. It gives us exact measurements there. So we don't have to guess where it's going. It's a perfect ring, which is really nice. We can also offset it around, so we can spin them around, give it some variation as well. So you can see how that could be quite useful. Okay, so that is the cloner. And we've got different modes as well. We're right now on the instance mode, which means it treats this as actual geometry. So at render time, all of these are going to be counted as actual geometry and in the viewport as well. Whereas if we do render instance, it's actually going to speed up our viewport. Say if we were to crank this to something like 500 and then change this to instance mode. Oh, it's still relatively quick, maybe 5,000. It's still quick, 50,000. There we go. Now we're getting some severe slowdown. Whereas if we hit render instance, notice how it's a lot faster in the viewport. It's because it's calculating these clones at render time instead of actual geometry in the viewport. And multi-instance is even faster. You can change the viewport mode. So instead of seeing the actual object, I'll just lower this back down to say 50. Instead of seeing the object in the viewport, we can just change it to be points. So all of our spheres will be represented as points. We can do matrix, so they're like little cubes. We could do bounding box, so that will give a rough shape of how big our object is. Or we could just leave it at object. So those are the main parameters. There's grid as well, which will allow you to do this kind of grid array, which is pretty fun. That's also really useful. You can adjust the per step. You can do endpoint. So let's cram in heaps there and per step. So that's the cloner, and it's going to be really useful for our main project later when we want to scatter some assets such as rocks and debris. So say this is our ground. We're going to grab a cloner and then put a sphere inside of it, holding the shift key there so it's a child of the cloner. Scale it down a little bit. So I'm holding shift there to snap in increments while scaling. I'm hitting T for scale as well. That's the shortcut. So you can see move, rotate, and scale. And then I'm going to select object mode. Going to get the plane down here. Change to render instance, and then boom, we can just populate it with lots of these spheres. Going to scale it down again so we have these little dots. Okay, and then with cloners, the cool thing about these is we can use effectors. So we'll find all of these in this drop down here. We're going to use the random effector, and I'm going to hold control, which is going to place it right next to the cloner. Because we have the cloner selected, if we go to the effectors tab, it will automatically apply it. Whereas if we just try to drop it without selecting it, nothing's going to happen. We can always just drag and drop it in there as well, but if you select it before creating it, it will automatically apply it. Okay, so in the random effector, we have right now nothing or nothing affecting it. That's giving it some randomness on the x-axis, the y-axis, and the z-axis. We can also give it some scale, so we can make it uniform or not uniform. We can scale it on each axis. So see, that's random on the y and on the z. We can rotate these. So example, let's delete the sphere and let's get in, say, something like a pyramid. Put it in the cloner. And right now you'll see that they're orientating the wrong way. So how do we fix that? Go into the transform tab and we want to hit, there we go, the P rotation. Set it to -90 and now they'll be aligned correctly. So if your clones are facing the wrong way, the transform tab of the cloner is going to help you reorient all of those clones inside. Okay. So then let's scale the pyramids down like that. And you'll also notice that the middle of the pyramid right now lines up with the ground plane. And the reason why is if we turn the cloner off, you can see that the actual axis point of the pyramid is in the middle. So when we clone it, it's actually cloning all of them so where that axis point is. But we don't want that. We want it so that the pyramid, the base of that, is resting on the ground floor. Because if this was like a rock asset or something, we would want that to be sitting right on top of the ground. So how do we fix that? We can either go to the transform tab, hit the Z and just push everything up manually. That's a way to do it. Or we can actually change where the axis sits on this geometry. So we could also make this editable, and then using the axis key, which if we hit the key, the letter L on our keyboard, that will give us the axis tool right there. We can then move it down. So I'm gonna middle mouse and go to the right view here. We could align that to the bottom. And then if we re-enable our cloner, I just pressed L again to get out of axis mode. Now it sits exactly on the ground. So that's another option. Or say we wanted to keep it parametric, what could we do then? We could put this inside of a null. And in this null, then we use the axis modification tool. Go to our view. Okay. So now the pyramid sits inside of this null that has the correct positioning, but our pyramid is still parametric, which means we can still change the amount of segments and we can do some other things to it. But then when we clone, it's gonna use the axis point of this null that it's in. Okay, so now we've got the random effector, and let's do some adjustments to that. We can now randomly rotate. You see there, they're all rotating along that axis, and if we want, we can modify some of that as well, so they're now bending other ways. I'm just going to keep that subtle to like 5 degrees. We can randomize the scale. Okay, so that's the random effector, and then what we're going to do is we want some bits. Right now it's pretty uniform all over the place. We want to have patches where maybe there's none of these pyramids, and then areas where there are. So how do we do that? Let's go into our cloner. Let's then press Control and hit the plane effector. But instead of position, we want to tick the scale, set it to uniform, and set it to -1. Okay, so then what that's going to do is get rid of everything, which obviously we don't want. So we'll go to our fields, and this is a way to pretty much control where these effectors are taking place. So think of it as like a Photoshop black and white mask. So if this is fully white right now, If we add in a field, like a shader field, nothing will happen at the moment. But if we go to our shader field, go to our shader, and we'll grab a noise, you'll see that it's already affected some areas. So if I increase the low clip and the high clip, which is pretty much just going to clamp the noise, you'll see the effects of that there. If I see, it's definitely more flat, whereas if I clamp it, you'll see that it's definitely more pronounced. So then I'm just going to scale up the size of this noise. So you can actually see the noise pattern there, which is pretty cool. And then, yeah, now we have regions where the plane effector, because it's set to a value of -1, it's actually deleting the clones. But then because of our field, which is this shader field, it's affecting where the plane effector is taking place. So then we could animate this noise, which is going to give us some cool results. So we can see that it's moving across and some clones are coming in and out. And you can see how helpful this would be for scattering assets like grass or rocks or anything really. So we've got the random effector and then the plane effector. We could also do a shader effector. And what this is going to do is, again, we can control the scale of this. But this allows us to directly plug in a noise shader into it, or any sort of shader. So if we didn't want noise, we could pick gradient. There's so many different ones. Vertex maps. Yeah, there's so many. But for now, we'll do the noise, and then actually instead of scale, let's do position. So let's make it obvious that it's going up. Okay, we actually want it to be a bit more clamped. So let's clamp it a bit. Okay, scale up the noise, and then say we would give it a bit of animation speed as well. And you can see what that's doing. So now, not only have we got the plane effector, which is revealing where the actual pyramids are growing, we've also got a secondary shader effector that's then driving the position upwards. So you see how in combination, you could model some pretty complex things with this cloner. You can also scatter some assets and then affect that and animate it with these effectors.